And I'm at the hour. So, well, I don't know why I feel the need to wait until exactly the hour I said I would stream the stream, but I feel it is important somehow. The clock looks at me. It judges me if I don't do it. Don't you, clock? Oh, I'm facing the wrong way. Don't you, clock? You judge me. I know you do, even though you can't talk and are seemingly non-magical. I can feel it. Anyway, I've been in this library a long time, and it's made me very strange. But yeah, gotta start talking in the house, yeah. Good to have you here, Abby. Always appreciate you being, yeah. But yeah, so, what am I talking about? What am I doing? Oh yes, so. I can't do my camping about not knowing if there is anyone here, because now I do know for sure that someone is here. But, yeah, so for those who are here and I don't know about, and who don't know me, my name is SkitterSkreetch. You can call me Skitter, and I am a small rat in a large library for books which I read at the behest of that lamp who you saw briefly while I was yelling at the clock. But yeah, and today we've got, what we got? We've got one of these left, the last of these Katherine Mansfields, and then we're going to do some other short stories. My plan is to do some more of the M.R. James ghost stories, but seeing as I have had 2 days of not coming out on stream, the rest of my voice, you might be thinking that I've had a restful little period, a little holiday, but no. Many new books. So we've got, what have we got? Selection of sort of larger novels that I managed to find and scavenge my way and bring back over him. Some more of the M.R. James. We've got some more, what's his name, Melville. We even had some stuff by a fellow by the name of Kafka. So we've got a whole selection of stuff to be reading in the future. Oh, and some more Wilds as well. A whole bunch of stuff. So if you have any particular preference for any of the things I've listed, feel free to let me know, and I'll happily switch over that, because I don't have any particular plans. But I do want to finish the last of the Katherine Mansfields today, just because I'm not hugely enjoying them, and so I don't want to, you know, just have there be one that I leave sort of hanging and then never go back to. Important to finish what you start, I reckon. So yeah. I think that's all I had to say today. Oh, I've now finally announced Fugi Theatre, which is an upcoming event I have with Discipline. Ah, it's good to hear, Abby. Food, shelter, and internet. Those are 3 important things to have. I guess I got those 3 things too. Maybe things ain't so bad. It was, oh yeah, so should talk about Fugi Theatre. Not entirely clear on how it's going to work, because again, I am trapped down here, but Lamp has decided that I need hobbies and contacts, and so he has decided that I'm starting a theatre troupe. So my buddy Discipline, our friend Plague, and then Avrez and Layla, who I know mostly through the Bird website, are going to be getting together this Sunday at 5 PM EST to do some live theatre, which, you know, hopefully that goes well, and if it doesn't, hopefully it will go badly in an entertaining way. Yeah, you should, if you are interested in what I do, it should be a natural expansion of that into a more general format, but otherwise, yeah, I don't think I've got much else to say. As always, feel free to let me know if you've missed something, or you need me to go back over something, or you just have some thoughts in a text. I'm happy to chat. If you have any preference for which of the books I do next, like after we finish the Mansfield, my throat is feeling strong, so I'm hopeful we can get through a few tonight. Let me know if you've got a preference. I think it's we've got ghost stories, we've got the sort of weird bedtime stories from Wild, we've got Melville's sort of scientific stuff, and then I don't know much about Kafka, but we've got Kafka. So if you've got any preference for any of them, feel free to let me know. Other than that, I think that's everything. So without any further ado that I'm going to do, let's get on to The Daughters of the Late Colonel by Katherine Mansfield. Oh, looks like this one's broken into little sections. Alright, I will stop and do commentary. I was going to say at the end, but if it's broken in the little chapters, I'll do it after the little chapter sections. So, starting out. The week after were one of the busiest weeks of their lives. Even when they went to bed, it were only their bodies that lay down and rested. Their minds went on, thinking things out, talking things over, wondering, deciding, trying to remember where. Constantia lay like a statue, her hands by her sides, her feet just overlapping each other, the sheet up to her chin. She stared at the ceiling. "You think Father would mind if we gave his hot top hat to the porter?" "The porter?" snapped Josephine. "Why ever the porter? What a very extraordinary idea." "Because," said Constantia slowly, "he must often have to go to funerals, and I noticed at the cemetery that he had only a bowler." She paused. "I thought then how very much he'd appreciate a top hat. You ought to give him a present too. He was always very nice to Father." "But," cried Josephine, flouncing on her pillow and staring across the dark at Constantia, "Father's head!" And suddenly, for one awful moment, she nearly giggled. Not, of course, that she felt in the least bit like giggling. It must have been habit. Years ago, when they had stayed awake at night, talking, their beds had simply heaved. And now the porter's head, disappearing, popped out like a candle under Father's hat. The giggle mounted. She clenched her hands, she fought it down, she frowned fiercely at the dark and said, Remember, terribly sternly. "Okay, well, no problem, Abba, I always appreciate your presence." But yeah, I think that's about all, yeah. But yeah, I'll try and have a great stream on your behalf. "Remember," she said, terribly sternly. "We can decide tomorrow," she said. Constantia noticed nothing. She sighed. "Do you think we ought to have our dressing gowns dyed as well?" "Black!" almost shrieked Josephine. "Well, what else?" said Constantia. "I was thinking, it doesn't seem quite sincere in a way to wear black out of doors when we're fully dressed, and then when we're at home." "But nobody sees us," said Josephine. She gave the bedclothes such a twitch that both her feet became uncovered, and she had to creep up the pillows to get them well under again. "Kate does," said Constantia, "and the postman very well might." Josephine thought of her dark red slippers, which matched her dressing gown, and of Constantia's favourite indefinite green ones, which went with hers. Black. 2 black dressing gowns and 2 pairs of black woolly slippers, creeping off to the bathroom like black cats. "I don't think it's absolutely necessary," she said. Silence. Then Constantia said, "We shall have to post the papers with the notice in them tomorrow to catch Salem mail. How many letters have we up to now?" 23. Josephina replied them all, and 23 times when she had come to. We miss our dear father so much, she had broken down and had to use her handkerchief, and on some of them even to soak up a very light blue tear with an edge of blotting paper. Strange, she couldn't have put it on, but 23 times. Even now, when she said over herself sadly, We miss our dear father so much, she could have cried if she'd wanted to. Have you got enough stamps? Came from Constantia. Oh, how can I tell? Said Josephine crossly. What's the good of asking me that now? I was just wondering, said Constantia mildly. Silence again. There come a little rustle, a scurrying up. A mouse, said Constantia. It can't be a mouse because there aren't any crumbs, said Josephine. But it doesn't know there aren't any, said Constantia. A spasm of pity squeezed her heart. Poor little thing. She wished she'd left tiny pieces of biscuit on the dressing table. They were awful to think of it not finding anything. What would it do? I can't think how they managed to live at all, she said slowly. Who? Demanded Josephine. And Constantia said, more loudly than she meant to, mice. Josephine was furious. Oh, what nonsense, Con, she said. What have mice got to do with it? You're asleep. I don't think I am, said Constantia. She shut her eyes to make sure. She was. Josephine arched her spine, pulled up her knees, folded her arms so that her fists come under her ears, and pressed her cheeks hard against the pillow. That's the end of fragment 1. I don't know what to call it. I sort of want to say chapter 1, but it's not chapters so much. They're just segments of the story. Anyhow. So we've got some established facts here. We've got 2 young women, presumably the aforementioned daughters of the Colonel, whose father has died, and presumably he was the Colonel in question. And they're going through the sort of tiringly mundane business of disposing of his effects and dealing with the body and doing all those things that must be done after a bereavement. It's interesting. Puts me in mind of was it 2 Sisters, the first of the stories in Dubliners. There's a poignant thing, really. That moment after bereavement, the practical matters that creep in, the stress of dealing with it all while it's such an hard time. And yeah, I'll have a little sip of water to quench my throat and my press. Two. Another thing which complicated matters was they had Nurse Andrews staying on with them that week. It was their own fault. They had asked her. It was Josephine's idea. On the last morning, when the doctor had gone, Josephine had said to Constantia, "Don't you think it'd be rather nice if we'd asked Nurse Andrews to stay on for a week as our guest?" "Very nice," said Constantia. "I thought," went on Josephine quickly, "I should just say this afternoon after I've paid her. My sister and I would be very pleased after all you've done for us, Nurse Andrews, if you would stay on for a week as our guest." "I'd have to put that in about being our guest in case—" "Oh, but you could hardly expect to be paid," cried Constantia. "One never knows," said Josephine sagely. Nurse Andrews had, of course, jumped at the idea, but were a bother, and they had to have regular sit-down meals at the proper times, whereas if they'd been alone they could just have asked Kate if she wouldn't have minded bringing them a tray whenever they were, or wherever they were. And meal times, now that the strain were over, were rather a trial. Nurse Andrews was simply fearful about butter. Really, they couldn't help feeling that about butter. At least she took advantage of their kindness. And she had that maddening habit of asking for just an inch more bread to finish what she had on her plate, and then at the last mouthful, absent-mindedly, of course it wasn't absent-mindedly, taking another helping. Josephine got very red when this happened, and she fastened her small, bead-like eyes on the tablecloth as if she saw a minute strange insect creeping through the web of it. But Constantia's long, pale face lengthened and set, and she gazed away. Away. Far over the desert, where that line of camels unwound like a thread of wool. "Renee was with Lady Tux," said Nurse Andrews. "She had such a dainty little contrivance for the butter. It was a silver cupid balanced on the border of a glass dish holding a tine fork. And when you wanted some butter, you simply pressed his foot, and he bent down and spread you a piece. It was quite a game." Josephine could hardly bear that. But "I think those things are very extravagant," was all she said. "But why?" asked Nurse Andrews, beaming through her eyeglasses. "No one surely would take more butter than one wanted, would one?" "Rincon," cried Josephine. She couldn't trust herself to reply. And proud young Kate, the enchanted princess, come to see what the old tabbies wanted now. She snatched away their plates and mocked something or other, and slapped down on a whistle, slapped down a white, terrified blancmange. "Jam, please, Kate," said Josephine kindly. Kate knelt and burst open the sideboard, lifted the lid of the jam pot, saw her empty, put it on the table and stalked off. "I am afraid," said Nurse Andrews a moment later, There isn't any. Oh, what a bother, said Josephine. What had we better do? Constantia looked dubious. We can't disturb Kate again, she said softly. Nurse Andrews waited, smiling at them both. Her eyes wandered, spying at everything behind her eyeglasses. Constantia, in despair, went back to her camels. Josephine frowned heavily, concentrated. If it hadn't been for this idiotic woman, she and Con would, of course, have eaten their blanc mange without. Suddenly the idea come. I know, she said. Marmalade. There's some marmalade in the sideboard. Get it, Con. I hope, laughed Nurse Andrews. Her laugh were like a spoon tinkling against the medicine glass. I hope it's not very bitter marmalade. That's the end of section 2. I'll have a quick sip of water. It's a small thing as well, really. Well, I suppose that's the point of the chapter. Small things that become more than they are. They ask the nurse to stay over, and obviously it's good to have company in grief, but all the little irritations of life just sort of become more. You're sort of so present in the moment, right? So wrapped up in your emotions that a person who takes more than their share of butter, or is insistent upon jam with pudding, becomes a much heavier imposition. How dare they live their life normally? How dare they be greedy or selfish when you're going through the world end, eh? All that grief transforms moments into much heavier moments. Don't think there's much else to say here, really. I mean, obviously there's some reference to camels and that, but that's just what's the term? Disassociation. Failure to engage with the realities at hand, the way to escape emotional pain. Very understandable. Terribly understandable. 3. After all, it were not long now, and then she'd be gone for good. There were no getting over the fact that she had been very kind to father. She had nursed him day and night at the end. Indeed, both Constantia and Josephine felt privately she had rather overdone than not leaving him at the very last. When they had gone in to say goodbye, Nurse Andrews had sat beside his bed the old time, holding his wrist and pretending to look at her watch. It couldn't have been necessary. It was so tactless too. Suppose my father had wanted to say something private to them. Not that he had. No, far from it. He lay there, purple, a dark angry purple in the face, and never even looked at them when they come in. Then, as they were standing there, wondering what to do, he suddenly opened one eye. Oh, what a difference it would have made. What a difference to their memory of him, how much easier to tell people about it, if he had only opened both. But no, one eye only. He glared at them a moment and then went out. That's the end of 3. Strange the small things that can change a memory, yeah. 4. It made it very awkward for them when Mr. Farrell was at St. John's called this some afternoon. The end was quite peaceful, I trust, were the first words he said as he glided towards him through the dark drawing room. Quiet, said Josephine faintly. They both hung their heads. Both of them felt certain the ours weren't at all peaceful hours. Won't you sit down? Said Josephine. Thank you, Miss Spinner, said Mr. Farrell gratefully. He folded his coat-tails and began to lower himself into father's armchair, but just as he touched it, he almost sprang up and slid in the next chair instead. He coughed. Josephine clasped her hands. Constantia looked vague. I want you to feel, Miss Pinner, said Mr. Farrells, and you, Miss Constantia, that I'm trying to be helpful. I want to be helpful to you both, if you will let me. These are the times, said Mr. Farrells, very simply and honestly, when God means us to be helpful to one another. Thank you very much, Mr. Farrells, said Josephine and Constantia. Not at all, said Mr. Farrells gently. He drew his kid gloves through his fingers and leaned forward. And if either of you would like a little communion, either or both of you, here and now, you have only to tell me. A little communion is often a great comfort, he added tenderly. But the idea of a little communion terrified them. What, in the drawing room, by themselves, with no altar or anything? The piano would be much too hard, thought Constantia, and Mr. Farrells could not possibly lean over it with a chalice, and Kate would be sure to come bursting in and interrupt them, or Josephine, thought Josephine. And supposing a bell rang in the middle, it might be somebody important, about their mourning. Would they get up reverently and go out, or would they have to wait in torture? Perhaps you will send around a note by your good Kate if you would care for it later, said Mr. Farrells. Oh yes, thank you very much, they both said. Mr. Farrells got up and took his black straw out from the round table. And about the funeral, he said softly. I may arrange that as your dear father's old friend, and yours, Miss Penner, and Miss Constantia. Josephine and Constantia got up too. I should like it to be quite simple, said Josephine firmly, and not too expensive. At the same time, I should like a good one that will last, thought dreamy Constantia, as if Josephine were buying a nightgown. Of course, Josephine didn't say that. One suitable for father's position. She was very nervous. I will run around to our good friend Mr. Knight, said Mr. Farrell soothingly. I will ask him to come and see you. I'm sure you'll find him very helpful indeed. The end of 4. It's troubling, really, or it must be troubling, planning a funeral. It's an odd time to be thinking about things like money, but at the same time, it's a strange thing to be spending money on, too. The dead don't appreciate it, they can't take notice. It's a show you're putting on for your friends and neighbours, purely a status thing. And it's a shameful, I feel shameful too to be having to dole out money. Must be a rough profession, that of the undertaker. Obviously you want to get paid for your craft, you need to pay. Practicalities are the thing, but every client is bereaved and in the worst moment of their life. Must feel terribly scummy asking for payment, but then I suppose you don't have to. I think Twain had a story about that actually, about someone who come made their own arrangements beforehand. That's probably the best way to have it done. I'd say it was something I should take care of myself, but I'm a rat. No one will bury me. Oddly company, I find that weird. Anyhow, little sip. Five. Well, at any rate, all that part of it were over, and neither of them could possibly believe that father were never coming back. Josephine had a moment of absolute terror at the cemetery, where the coffin were lowered, and think that she and Constantia had done this thing without asking his permission. What would father say when he found out? We were bound to find out sooner or later. He always did. Buried? You two girls had me buried, jeered his stick thumping. Oh, what would they say? What possible excuse could they offer? It sounded such an appalling heartless thing to do. Such a wicked advantage to take of a person because he happened to be helpless at the moment. The other people seemed to treat it all as a matter of course. They were strangers. They couldn't be expected to understand that father was the very last person for such a thing to happen to. Now the entire blame for it would fall on her and Constantia, and the expense she thought stepping into the tight button cab. When she had to show him the bills, what would he say then? She heard him absolutely roaring. And do you expect me to pay for this grim crack excursion of yours? Oh, groaned poor Josephine aloud. I shouldn't have done it, Con. And Constantia, pale as a lemon in all that blackness, said in a frightened whisper, Done what, Jug? Let them bury father like that, said Josephine, breaking down and crying into her new, queer-smelling mourning handkerchief. But what else could we have done? Asked Constantia wonderingly. We couldn't have kept him, Jug. We couldn't have kept him unburied. At any rate, not in a flat that size. Josephine blew her nose. The cab was dreadfully stuffy. I don't know, she said forlornly. It is all so dreadful. I feel we ought to have tried, just for a time at least. Make perfectly sure. One thinks so. And her tears sprang out again. Father will never forgive us for this. Never. That's the end of 5. Grief does do strange things to a person. It can be very hard to make a thing feel real to you, even if things are expected and natural as death. Perhaps especially something like that. People have a great trouble wrapping their heads around death. I think it's partly because it's not so common a thing anymore, at least not so common in the everyday. You have safety regulations and modern medicine and all sorts of things. When people do their dying, generally it's either a tragic accident that comes entirely unexpected, or they do it out of sight in a nice clean hospital room. So you don't see a lot of the average death nowadays. And even when there is one somewhere public, it's generally covered up, police come round, sites cordoned off. People don't even kill their own meat these days. I'm maybe a little bit different. Rats, you know. You're never too far from death as a rat. I've got scars, plenty that could have done me if they'd been an inch in a different direction, but... well, I've seen plenty of my own go, but... we ain't exactly so, how'd you say? Precious about our lives as humans. Most of us, anyway, don't have much to be precious about. Strange, really. I suppose I never really considered my relationship with death. Guess it's different now. I can think. I mean, I did that thing, what, about a week back now, where I died briefly, but... I mean, I was still here the old time, as a ghost, and I got brought back pretty quick, so I guess really that's not like dying at all. And even that didn't feel real. Imagine how much harder it must be if it's not even you who's doing it, but someone else. Six. Father would never forgive them. That's what they felt more than ever when, 2 mornings later, they went into his room to go through his things. They had discussed it quite calmly. They were even down on Josephine's list of things to be done. Go through Father's things and settle about them. That were a very different matter from saying after breakfast. Well, are you ready, Con? Yes, Jug, when you are. Then I think we'd better get it over. It would darken the hall. It had been a rule for years never to disturb Father in the morning, whatever happened. Now they were going to open the door without knocking even. Constantia's eyes were enormous at the idea. Josephine felt weak in the knees. You go first, she gasped, pushing Constantia. But Constantia said, as she always had said on those occasions, No, Jug, that's not fair. You're eldest. Josephine was just going to say, what other times she wouldn't have owned for the world, what she kept for her very last weapon. But you're tallest. When they noticed the kitchen door open, and there stood Kate. Very stiff, said Josephine, grasping the door handle and doing her best to turn it, as if anything ever deceived Kate. It couldn't be helped. That girl was... and the door was shut behind them, but they weren't in Father's room at all. They might have suddenly walked through the wall by mistake, into a different flat altogether. There was a door just behind them. They were too frightened to look. Josephine knew that if it was, it were holding itself tight shut. Constantia felt that, like the doors in her dreams, it hadn't any handle at all. It was the coolness which made it so awful, the whiteness which... Everything were covered. The blinds were down, a cloth hung over the mirror, a sheet hid the bed, and a huge fan of white paper filled the fireplace. Constantia timidly put out her hand. She almost expected a snowflake to fall. Josephine felt a queer tingling in her nose, as if her nose were freezing. And a cab clopped over the cobbles below, and the quiet seemed to shake in the little pieces. I'd better pull up a blind, said Josephine bravely. Yes, it might be a good idea, whispered Constantia. They only gave the blind a touch, but it flew up and the cord flew after, where on the blind stick the little tassel tapped as if trying to get free. That was too much for Constantia. Don't you think we might put it off just for another day? She whispered. Why? Said Josephine, feeling as usual much better now that she knew for certain Constantia would terrify. It's got to be done. But I do wish you wouldn't whisper, Con. I didn't know I was whispering, whispered Constantia. And why do you keep on staring at the bed? Said Josephine, raising her voice almost defiantly. There's nothing on the bed. Oh, Jug, don't you say so, said poor Connie. At any rate, not so loudly. Josephine felt herself that she had gone too far. She took a wide swerve over the chest of drawers, put out her hand, but quickly drew it back again. Connie, she gasped and wheeled about, and leaned with her back against the chest of drawers. Oh, Jug, what? Josephine could only glare. She had the most extraordinary feeling that she had just escaped something simply awful. But how could she explain to Constantia that Father were in his chest of drawers? They were in the top drawer with his handkerchiefs and neckties, or in the next with his shirts and pyjamas, or in the lowest with all his suits. You were watching there, hidden away, just behind the door handle ready to spring. She pulled a funny old-fashioned face at Constantia, just as they used to back in the old days when she was going to cry. I can't open it, she nearly wailed. No, don't, Chuck, whispered Constantia earnestly. It's much better not to. Don't let's open anything, at any rate not for a long time. But it seems so weak, said Josephine, breaking down. Why not be weak for once, Chuck? Argued Constantia, whispering quite fiercely. If it's weak. And a pale stare flew from locked wiring table to safe, to the huge glittering wardrobe, and she began to breathe in a queer, panting way. Why shouldn't we be weak for once in our lives, Chuck? It's quite excusable. Let's be weak. Be weak, Chuck. It's much nicer to be weak than to be strong. And then she did one of those amazingly bold things that she'd done about twice before in their lives. She marched over to the wardrobe, turned the key, and took it out of the lock. Took it out of the lock and held it up to Josephine, showing Josephine by her extraordinary smile that she knew what she'd done. She'd risked deliberately father being in there among its overcoats. If the huge wardrobe had lurched forward, had crashed down on Constantia, Josephine wouldn't have been surprised. On the contrary, she would have thought it was the only suitable thing to happen. But nothing happened. Only the room seemed quieter than ever, and bigger flakes of cold air fell on Josephine's shoulder and knees. She began to shiver. Come, Jug, said Constantia, still with that awful callous smile, and Josephine followed just as she had the last time, and Constantia had pushed Benny into the round pond. That's the end of 6. Again, the little realities, the mundane things, made impossible by time and morning. Terribly sad thing, terribly sad, still. I have a sip of water. It's so easy to be haunted. So terribly easy, especially when you knew someone who's died. Not always, of course. In fact, the opposite can be tragic too. I spent a long time down here trying to be haunted. It took me ages to summon up you spirits of the earth, as many as you are. And even now I only know that one is here, haunted by a single abbey. And someone who was in your life dies, and suddenly they're everywhere. They're ghost haunting you, unable to get away from them, hiding behind every corner. Seems awful mean of them, really. 7. But the strain told on them when they were back in the dining room. They sat down, very shaky, looked at each other. I don't think I can settle to anything, said Josephine, until I've had something. Do you think we could ask Kate for 2 cups of hot water? I really don't see why we shouldn't, said Constantia carefully. She was quite normal again. I won't ring. I'll go to the kitchen door and ask her. Yes, do, said Josephine, sinking down in the chair. Tell her just 2 cups. Got nothing else on a tray. She needn't even put the jugs on, need she? Said Constantia, as they came up, very well complaining if the jugs had been there. Oh no, certainly not. The jug's not at all necessary. She can pour it directly out of the kettle, cried Josephine, feeling that would be a labour saving indeed. Her cold lips quivered at the greenish brims. Josephine curved her small red hands round the cup. Constantia sat up and blew on the wavy stem, making it flutter from one side to the other. Speaking of Benny, said Josephine. And though Benny hadn't been mentioned, Constantia immediately looked as though he had. He'll expect us to send him something of father's, of course. It's so difficult to know what to send to sell on. You mean things get unstuck on the voyage, murmured Constantia. No, lost, said Josephine sharply. You know there's no post, only runners. Both paused to watch a black man in white linen drawers running through the pale fields for dear life, with a large brown paper parcel in his hands. Josephine's black man was tiny. He scurried along, glistening like an ant. There was something bland and tireless about Constantia's tall, thin fella, which made him, she decided, a very unpleasant person indeed. On the veranda, dressed all in white and wearing a cork helmet, stood Benny. His right hand shook up and down as father's did when he was impatient, and behind him, not in the least interested, sat Hilda, the unknown sister-in-law. She swung on a cane rocker and flicked over the leaves of the tatler. I think his watch would be the most suitable present, said Josephine. Constantia looked up. She seemed surprised. Oh, would you trust a gold watch to a native? But of course I'd disguise it, said Josephine. No one would know it was a watch. Do you like the idea of having to make a parcel such a curious shape that no one could possibly guess what it was. She even thought for a moment of hiding the watch in a narrow cardboard corset box that she'd kept by her for a long time, waiting for it to come in for something. It was such a beautiful, firm cardboard, but no, it wouldn't be appropriate for this occasion. It had lettering on it, medium women's 28 extra firm busks. It would be almost too much of a surprise for Benny to open that and find Father's watch inside. And of course it isn't as though it would be going ticking, said Constantia, who was still thinking of the native love of jewellery. At least, she added, it would be very strange if after all this time it was. That's the end of 8. We have more of the sort of minutiae of grief. Thinking of other people, even as you're going through it. Marred slightly by the somewhat racist attitude of the time period, but it's far from the worst we've read, so I press on. 8. Josephine made no reply. She had flown off on one of her tangents. She had suddenly thought of Cyril. Wasn't it more usual for the only grandson to have the watch? And then dear Cyril was so appreciative, and a gold welch meant so much to a young man. Benny, in all probability, had quite got out of the habit of watches. Men so seldom wore waistcoats in these hot climates, whereas Cyril in London wore them from year's end to year's end. It would be so nice for her, Constantia, when he come to tea, to know it were there. I see you've got on grandfather's watch, Cyril. It would be somehow so satisfactory. Dear boy, what a blow his sweet, sympathetic little note had been. Of course they quite understood, but were most unfortunate. It would have been such a point having him, Josephine. And he would have enjoyed it too. Enjoyed it so, said Constantia, not thinking what she was saying. However, as soon as he got back, he would come on to tea with his aunties. Cyril and tea were one of their rare treats. Now, Cyril, you mustn't be frightened of our cakes. Your Auntie Con and I bought them at Buzzard's this morning. We know what a man's appetite is, so don't be ashamed of making a good tea. Josephine cut recklessly into the rich dark cake that stood for her winter gloves on the soil and heel in a Constantia's only respectable shoes. But she were most unmanlike at his attitude. I say, Aunt Josephine, I simply can't. I've only just had lunch, you know. Oh, Cyril, that can't be true. It's after 4, cried Josephine. Constantia sat with her knife poised over the chocolate roll. It is all the same, said Cyril. I had to meet a man in Victoria, and he kept me hanging about till there was almost time to get lunch and come on here. And he gave me a few. Cyril put his hand on his forehead. A terrific blowout, he said. It was disappointing, the day of all days, but still we couldn't be expected to know. But you'll have a meringue, won't you, Cyril? Said Aunt Josephine. These meringues were brought especially for you. Your dear father was so fond of them. We were sure you are too. I am, Aunt Josephine, cried Cyril ardently. Do you mind if I take half to begin with? Not at all, dear boy. We mustn't let you off with that. Is your dear father still so fond of meringues? Asked Auntie Con gently. She winced faintly as she broke through the shell of hers. No, I don't quite know, Auntie Con, said Cyril breezily. They both looked up. Don't know? Almost snapped Josephine. Don't know anything like that about your own father, Cyril? Surely, said Auntie Con softly. Cyril tried to laugh it off. Oh, well, he said. It's such a long time since... He faltered. He stopped. Their faces were too much for him. Even so, said Josephine. Auntie Con looked. Cyril put down his tea cup. Wait a bit, he cried. Wait a bit, Aunt Josephine. What am I thinking of? He looked up. They were beginning to brighten. Cyril slapped his nose. Of course, he said. It was meringues. How could I have forgotten? Yes, Aunt Josephine, you're perfectly right. Father's most frightfully keen on meringues. They didn't only beam. Aunt Josephine went scarlet with pleasure. Auntie Con gave a deep, deep sigh. And now, Cyril, you must come and see Father, said Josephine. He knows you were coming today. Right, said Cyril, very firmly and heartily. He got up from his chair and suddenly he glanced at the clock. I say, Auntie Con, isn't your clock a bit slow? I've got to meet a man at Paddington just after 5. I'm afraid I shan't be able to stay very long with Grandfather. Oh, he won't expect you to stay very long, said Aunt Josephine. Constantia was still gazing at the clock. She couldn't make up her mind if it were fast or slow. It were one or the other, she felt almost certain of that. At any rate, he had been. Cyril still lingered. Aren't you coming along, Auntie Con? Of course, said Josephine. We shall all go. Come on, Con. That's the end of 9. You feel you should be close to your relatives after one of them dies. It feels wrong that you shouldn't have been if you hadn't been. Even if they're distant and you haven't spoken in a long time, feels like family becomes more important. Like all your connections become more important. Like you should be taking every moment you can to get to know them, to make memories. It doesn't make the people any more pleasant, really. It just makes you maudlin. And the people do disappoint you every time. None. They knocked at the door, and Cyril followed his aunt into grandfather's hot, sweatish room. "Come on," said Grandfather Pinner. "Don't hang about. What is it? What have you been up to?" He was sitting in front of a roaring fire, clasping his stick. He had a thick rug over his knees. On his lap there lay a beautiful pale yellow silk handkerchief. "It's Cyril, father," said Josephine shyly, and she took Cyril's hand and led him forward. "Good afternoon, grandfather," said Cyril, trying to take his hand out of Aunt Josephine's. Grandfather Pinner shut his eyes at Cyril in the way he was famous for. "Where were Auntie gone?" She stood on the other side of Aunt Josephine. Her long arms hung down in front of her, and her hands were clasped. She never took her eyes off Grandfather. "Well," said Grandfather Pinner, beginning to thump, "what have you got to tell me?" What had he? What had he got to tell him? Cyril felt himself smiling like a perfect imbecile. The room was stifling too. But Aunt Josephine come to his rescue. She cried brightly. "Cyril says his father is still very fond of meringues, father dear." "Eh?" said Grandfather Pinner, curving his hand like a purple meringue shell over one ear. Josephine repeated. "Cyril says that his father is still very fond of meringues." "Can't hear," said the old Colonel Pinner. He waved Josephine away with his stick and then pointed with his stick to Cyril. "Tell me what she's trying to say," he said. "Oh, God." "Master," said Cyril, blushing and staring at Aunt Josephine. "Do, dear," she smiled. "It will please him so much." "Come on, out with it," cried Colonel Pinner testily, beginning to thump again. And Cyril leaned forward and yelled, "Father's still very fond of meringues." At that, Grandfather Pinner jumped as though he had been shot. "Don't shout," he cried. "What's the matter with the boy? Meringues, what about him?" "Aunt Josephine, must we go on?" grinned Cyril desperately. "Quite all right, dear boy," said Aunt Josephine, as though he and she were at her dentist together. "You'll understand in a minute." And she whispered to Cyril, "He's getting a bit deaf, you know." Then she leaned forward and really bawled at Grandfather Pinner. "Cyril only wanted to tell you, father dear, that his father is still very fond of meringues." Colonel Pinner heard that time, heard and brooded, looking Cyril up and down. "What an extraordinary thing," said old Grandfather Pinner. "What an extraordinary thing to come all this way here to tell me." And Cyril thought it was. "Yes, I should send Cyril the once," said Josephine. "That would be very nice," said Constantia. "I seem to remember last time he came there was some little trouble about the time." That's in the 9. It's hard sometimes with elderly relatives. A person in the last years of their lives, generally in discomfort, falling to pieces. It's hard to admit to yourself they're not the same person they used to be. I'd deal with that fact. And of course you want to care for them, you want to do the right by them, do the best by them. But it's hard sometimes to bring yourself to. Hard to know what to do for them. What's a kindness and what's a cruelty? Is it better to let the old man rest? Have his peace? Not be shouted at? Or is it cruel to deprive him of the visitation of his grandson? It's hard to say, really. Hard to say indeed. Tem. They were interrupted by Kate bursting through the door in her usual fashion, as though she had discovered some secret panel on the wall. "Fried or boiled?" asked the cold, low voice. "Fried or boiled?" Josephine and Constantia were quite bewildered for a moment. They could hardly take it in. "Fried or boiled what, Kate?" asked Josephine, trying to begin to concentrate. Kate gave a loud sniff. "Fish." "Well, why didn't you say something immediately?" Josephine reproached her gently. "How should you expect us to understand, Kate? There are a great many things in this world, you know, which are fried or boiled." And after such a display of courage, she said quite brightly to Constantia, "Which do you prefer, Con?" "I think it might be nice to have it fried," said Constantia. "On the other hand, of course, boiled fish is very nice. I think I prefer both equally. Unless you, in that case." "I shall fry it," said Kate, and she bounced back, leaving the door open and slamming the door of her kitchen. Josephine gazed at Constantia. She raised her pale eyebrows until they rippled away into her pale hair. She got up. She said in a very lofty, imposing way, "Do you mind following me into the drawing room, Constantia? I have something of great importance to discuss with you." Always to the drawing room they retire when they wanting to talk over Kate. Josephine closed the door meaningly. "Sit down, Constantia," she said, very grateful. She might have been receiving Constantia for the first time, and Con looked vaguely for a chair, as though she felt indeed quite a stranger. "Now the question is," said Josephine, bending forward, "whether we shall keep her or not." "That is the question," agreed Constantia. "And this time," said Josephine firmly, "we must come to a definite decision." Constantia looked for a moment as though she might begin going over all the other times, then she pulled herself together and said, "Yes, Joe." "You see, Con," explained Josephine, "everything is so changed now." Constantia looked up quickly. "I mean," went on Josephine, "we're not dependent on Kate as we were," and she blushed faintly. "There's not Father to cook for." "That's perfectly true," agreed Constantia. "Father certainly doesn't want any cooking now, whatever else." Josephine broke in sharply. "You're not sleepy, are you, Con?" "Sleepy, Joe?" Constantia was wide-eyed. "I'll concentrate more," said Josephine sharply, and returned to the subject. "What it comes to is, if we did," and this she barely breathed, glancing at the door, "give Kate notice," she raised her voice again, "we could manage our own food." "Why not?" cried Constantia. She couldn't help smiling. The idea was so exciting. She clasped her hands. "What should we live on, Jug?" "Oh, eggs in various forms," said Jug lofty again. "And besides, there are all the cooked foods." "They've always heard," said Constantia. "They are considered so very expensive." "Not if one buys them in moderation," said Josephine. But she tore herself away from this fascinating bypath and dragged Constantia after her. "What we've got to decide now, however, is whether we really do trust Kate or not." Constantia leaned back. Her flat little laugh flew from her lips. "Isn't it curious, Jug," she said, "that just on this one subject I've never been able to quite make up my mind." That's the end of 10. I can't say I have much experience working with the management of servants, given that I've never had a servant in my life. But I can imagine it can be difficult to have that sort of responsibility over someone, maintain their employment. I mean, obviously, it's worse to be under someone else and not have control over your own fate. There's got to be weight in those decisions. And I think after a bereavement is a pretty rough time to be making any sort of weighty decisions at all. I mean, Kate is written as pretty brushed and snappish, presumably a cook specialising in supplying for the old man, so it might make sense to let her go. Though I suspect it would be polite to give her a good deal on this. And yeah, I also suspect they'll fail to feed themselves quite so well as they expect they will. People consider cooking unskilled labour, but there's no such thing as unskilled labour. And cooking seems quite tricky about my mind. And yeah, drink. She never had. The old difficult, 11. She never had. The old difficulty would approve anything. How do one prove things? How could one? Suppose Kat had stood in front of her and deliberately made a face. Might she very well have been in pain? One impossible at any rate to ask Kate if she were making a face at her. If Kate answered no, and of course she would say no, what a position, how undignified. Then again, Constantia suspected, she was almost certain that Kate went to her chest of drawers when she and Josephine were out, not to date things but to spa. Many times she'd come back to find her amethyst cross in the most unlikely places, under her lace tiles or on top of her evening Bertha. More than once she had laid a trap for Kate. She arranged things in a special order and then called Josephine the witness. "You see, Jack? Quite calm. Now I shall be able to tell." But oh dear, when she did go look, she was as far off from proof as ever. If anything were dispersed, it might so well have happened as she closed the drawer. A Joel might have done it so easily. "You come, Jug, and decide. I really can't, it's too difficult." But after a pause and a long chair, Josephine would sigh. "Now you put the doubt into my mind, Con. I'm sure I can't tell myself." Well, we could postpone it again, said Josephine. If we postpone it this time. That's the end of 11. Grief makes people strange, but the inability to make any decisions at all in life is a very irritating habit. And it seems like, based on this, they are bad at that even in more normal times. It's important to be able to have a view or an opinion, even if you're not sure of it. Better to leave something and then be proved wrong than to not believe anything at all. 12. At that moment in the street below, a barrel organ struck up. Josephine and Constantia sprang their feet together. Run, Con, said Josephine. Run quickly, there's a sixpence on the... And they remembered. It didn't matter. They'd never have to stop the organ grinder again. Never again would she and Constantia be told to make the monkey take his noise somewhere else. Never would sound that loud. Never would sound that loud, strange bellow when Father thought they were not hurrying enough. The organ grinder might play there all day and stick would not thump. It never will thump again. It never will thump again, played the barrel organ. What was Constantia thinking? She had such a strange smile. She looked different. She couldn't be going to cry. Jug, Jug, said Constantia softly, pressing her hands together. You know what day it is? It's Saturday. It's a week today, a whole week. A week since Father died. A week since Father died, cried the barrel organ. And Josephine too forgot to be practical and sensible. She smiled faintly, strangely. On the engine carpet there fell a square of sunlight, pale red. It come and went and come, and stayed, deepened, until it shone almost golden. The sun's out, said Josephine, as though it really mattered. A perfect fountain of bubbling notes shook from the barrel organ, round, bright notes, carelessly scattered. Constantia lifted her big, cold hands as if to catch them, and then her hands fell again. She walked over to the mantelpiece, to her favourite Buddha, and the stone and gilt image, whose smile always gave her such a queer feeling, almost a pain, yet a pleasant pain, seemed today to be more than smiling. He knew something. He had a secret. I know something you don't know, said her Buddha. Oh, what was it? What could it be? And yet she had always felt that there was something. The sunlight pressed through the windows, thieved its way in, flashed its light over the furniture and the photographs. Josephine watched it. But come the mother's photograph, the enlargement over the piano. It lingered as though puzzled to find so little remained of mother, except the earrings shaped like tiny pagodas and a black feather boa. Why did the photographs of dead people always fade so? Wondered Josephine. As soon as a person were dead, their photograph died too. But of course this one of their mother were very old. They were 35 years old. Josephine remembered standing on a chair and pointing out that feather boa to Constantia and telling her that it was a snake that had killed their mother in the salon. Would everything have been different if mother hadn't died? She didn't see why. Aunt Florence had lived with them until they had left school. They had moved 3 times and had their yearly holiday, and there had been changes of servants, of course. Some little sparrows, young sparrows they sounded, chirped on the window ledge. Yeep, yeep, yeep. But Josephine thought they were not sparrows, not on the window ledge. It were inside her, that queer little crying noise. Yeep, yeep, yeep. Ah, what was it crying, so weak and forlorn? If mother had lived like they had married, there had been nobody for them to marry. There had been father's Anglo-Indian friends, but before he quarrelled with them. But after that, she and Constantia never met a single man except clergymen. How did one meet men? Or even if they'd met them, how could they have got to know men well enough to have been more than strangers? One read of people having adventures, being followed and so on, but nobody ever followed Constantia now. Oh yes, there had been one year at Eastbourne, a mysterious man at their boarding house who had put a note on the jug of hot water outside the bedroom door. But by the time Connie had found it, the steam had made the writing too faint to read. They couldn't even make out to which one of them it were addressed. And he had left next day, and that were all. The rest of him booking after father, and at the same time keeping out of father's way. But now? The thieving sun touched Josephine gently. She lifted her face. She was drawn over the window by gentle beams. Until the barrel organ stopped playing, Constantia stayed before the Buddha, wondering, but not as usual, not vaguely. This time her wonder were like longing. She remembered the time she had come here, crept out of bed in the nightgown when the moon was full, and laying on the floor with her arms outstretched, as though she were crucified. Why? The big pale moon had made her do it. The horrible dancing figures on the carved screen had leered at her, and she hadn't minded. She remembered too how whenever they were at the seaside she had gone off by herself, and got as close to the sea as she could, and sung something she had made up while she gazed out over that restless water. There had been this other life, running out, bringing things home in bags, getting things on approval, discussing with Jug and taking them back to get more things on approval, and arranging Father's trays and trying not to annoy Father. It all seemed to have happened in a kind of tunnel. It wasn't real. It was only when she come out of the tunnel into the moonlight, or by the sea, or into a thunderstorm that she really felt herself. What did it mean? What was it she were always wanting? What did it all lead to? Now? Now? She turned away from the with one of her vague gestures. She went over to where Josephine was standing. She wanted to say something to Josephine, something frightfully important about the future and what. Don't you think perhaps, she began, but Josephine interrupted her. I was wondering if now, she murmured. They stopped. They waited for each other. Go on, Con, said Josephine. No, go on, Jug, after you, said Constantia. No, say what you were going to say. You began, said Josephine. I'd rather hear what you were going to say first, said Constantia. Don't be absurd, Con. Really, Jug. Connie! Oh, Jug! A pause. And Constantia said faintly, I can't say what I was going to say, Jug, because I've forgotten what it was that I was going to say. Josephine was silent for a moment. She stared at a big cloud where the sun had been, and she replied shortly, I forgot too. That's the end of the Daughters of the Colonel. What an heartbreaking final little piece of that was. Jeez. I resonate with a lot of that, for different reasons. For Josephine, I resonate with the idea of life not going the way you planned, of it all being moved around a certain different person, not yourself. Someone else being the centre of your world, never making your own plans, never doing the things you feel like you ought to because you're working on someone else's behalf. I won't name names, I don't need to, who knows. And for Constantia, I feel that too, the absent feeling. I don't have it as badly as she does. I don't most of the time I'm here, but there are times when you just drift through your life, you know? All in an haze in a fog and you barely remember what you've done in the real moments of it. It all seems so fake, so imagined, eh? And then of course they stop, they interrupt each other, they come to their big revelations at the same moment, and then they are so timid, so lacking as people, because of the lives they've led, that they cannot bring themselves to talk over one another to express their points, and so they're lost. The moment passes and they fall back into oblivion and obscurity. The story doesn't tell it, but I feel in my heart that they will just go on as they have been. And Lord, what a tragic thing to be, going on as you have been. Well. That went longer than I expected. That was the longest of any of the Katherine Mansfields. It took us almost an hour. And my throat's not, there's a little give in it, but I still got a little bit left in me, I think. So, I think we'll do one more short story. If anyone is hanging around who wants to, has any input between what we got, One of the Wilds, the bedtime stories for kids that are a bit weird, fucked up, something by Melville, one of the ghost stories by James, or something by Kafka, whatever they are, feel free to let me know. Otherwise I'll make the decision myself after I have a quick sip of water. seems a moment's passed. And if there be any ghosts or spirits here, they do not feel the need to make their opinions known. I know that I am haunted. The ghosts are so dreadfully quiet. I invoke you, spirits of the earth, but you do not speak to me. So, as ghosts are on my mind, then we should do a ghost story, I suppose. One of these AMR Jameses. We've got 3 of them. We got Alberic Scrapbook, we got Lost Arts, and we got the Mezzotint, which I'm assuming is a proper noun because I don't. Well, I'm assuming quite a lot of these are proper nouns, but yeah. Let's give them a look over. I don't want anything too long, but I don't think any of these is especially long, really. Let's just let's have a look. So it's Alberic Scrapbook. Looks to be about 20 pages. The Mezzotint is 16 and... well no. Lost Arts is 16 and the Mezzotint is 18. So... yeah, no, them's too bad. I think we can push through Alberic Scrapbook. It's nice to do them in the order they're on the shelf, isn't it? Even if it is the longest of them. I think we can hold up to 20 pages. But yeah. I mean, again, unless anyone has a preference, spirits of the earth I invoke you, etc, etc. I'll move on with Alberic Scrapbook there now. It's terribly warm down here of late. There's some sort of, I don't know what it was, spillover from one of the demonic labs and lamp. In order to counteract the corruption, he calls it, is burn an extra sacred oil. So he's burning about 2 or 3 times as hot as he normally does. There's a little section over a couple rooms down where they used to keep spellbooks that dealt with cold. It's kept cold deliberately by Remnant Magic, and I go hang out there most of the time when I've got a free moment. But I can't stream from there because, well, it's not really inside the walls proper, so I don't think the lamp could do it. But even if it could, it's very loud in there. Buzzes like terrible, so I've got to be warming up while I'm out here doing it. Also, I think the beast is getting wise to me hanging out in there because the Whistler comes around there more often than he does most places. So just have to grin and bear it for the time being. I don't imagine lamp can be burning too hot for too long, can he? Don't think we've got too much oil left, so it'll pass. Right. Enough dawdling and waiting. No one's coming by for my invocation, so Alberic Scrapbook. St Bertrand de Comminges is a decayed town on the spurs of the Pyrenees, not very far from Toulouse, and still nearer to Bagnières de Luchon. It was the site of a bishopric until the Revolution, and has a cathedral which is visited by a certain number of tourists. In the spring of 1883, an Englishman arrived at this old wild place. I can hardly dignify it with the name of city, for there are not 2,000 inhabitants. He was a Cambridge man who had come specially from Toulouse to see St Bertrand's church. I left 2 friends who were less keen archaeologists than himself in their hotel at Toulouse, and I promised to join him on the following morning. Half an hour at the church would satisfy them, and all 3 could then pursue their journey in the direction of Orc. But our Englishman had come early on the day in question and proposed to himself to fill a notebook, and they used several dozen of plates in the process of describing and phonographing every corner of the wonderful church that dominates the little hill of Comminges. In order to carry out this design satisfactorily, it was necessary to monopolise the verger of the church for the day. The verger, or sacristan, I prefer the latter appellation, inaccurate as it may be, were accordingly sent for by the somewhat brusque lady who keeps the inn of the Chapel Rouge. And when he come, the Englishman found him an unexpectedly interesting object to study. He was not in the personal appearance of the little dry, wizened old man that the interest lay, for he was precisely like dozens of other church guardians in France, but in a curious, furtive, or rather hunted and oppressed air which he had. He was perpetually half glancing behind him. The muscles of his back and shoulders seemed to be hunched in continual nervous contraction, as if he were expecting every moment to find himself in the clutch of an enemy. The Englishman hardly knew whether to put him down as a man hunted by fixed delusion, as one oppressed by a guilty conscience or an unbearably impact husband. The probabilities, when reckoned up, certainly pointed to the last idea, but still, the impression conveyed was that of a more formidable persecutor, even than a termagant wife. However, the Englishman, let us call him Deniston, was soon too deep in his notebook and too busy with his camera to give more than an occasional glance to the sacristan. Wherever he did look at him, he found him at no great distance, either huddling himself back against the wall, or crouching in one of the gorgeous stalls. Deniston became rather fidgety after a time, mingled suspicion that he would keep the old man from his déjeuner, that we regarded as likely to make away with St. Bertrand's ivory crochet, or with the dusty stuffed crocodile that hangs over the font, began to torment him. "Won't you go home?" I said at last. "I'm quite well able to finish my notes alone. You can lock me in if you like. I shall want at least 2 hours more here, and it must be cold for you, isn't it?" "Good heavens," said the little man, and the suggestion seemed to throw in a state of unaccountable terror. "Such a thing cannot be thought of for a moment. Leave monsieur alone in the church. No. 2 hours, 3 hours, all will be the same to me. I have breakfasted, I am not at all cold, and many thanks to monsieur." "Very well, my little man," quoth Deniston to himself. "You have been wanted, and you must take the consequences." Before the expiration of the 2 hours, the stalls, the enormous dilapidated organ, the choir screen of Bishop Jean de Molion, the remains of glass and tapestry, and the objects in the treasure chamber had been very well and truly examined. The sacristan, still keeping at Deniston's heels, and every now and then whipping around as if he had been stung, when one or other of the strange noises that trouble a large empty building fell on his ear. Curious noises there were, sometimes. "Once," Deniston said to me, "I could have sworn I heard a thin metallic voice laughing high up in the tower." I darted an inquiring glance at my sacristan. He was wet to the lips. "It is he, it is no one. The door is locked," was all he said, and we looked at each other for a full minute. "Another little incident puzzled Deniston a good deal. You were examining a large dark picture that hangs behind the altar, one of a series illustrating the miracles of St. Bertrand. The composition of the picture is well nigh incomprehensible. There is a Latin legend below which runs thus: "Qualter es Bertrandus liberate hominum quem diabolus Dio volebit strangare." As St. Bernard delivered a man whom the devil long ago sought to strangle. Long sought to strangle, not long ago. Deniston would turn to the sacristan with a smile and a jocular remark of some sort on his lips. We were confounded to see the old man on his knees, gazing at the picture with the eye of a supplicant in agony, his hands tightly clasped and a rain of tears on his cheek. Deniston naturally pretended not to have noticed nothing, but the question would not away from him. Why should a daub of this kind affect anyone so strongly? He seemed himself to be getting some sort of clue to the reason of the strange look that had been puzzling him all the day. The man must be a monomaniac. What were his monomania? It was nearly 5 o'clock. The short day was drawing in, and the church began to fill with shadows, by the curious noises, the muffled footfalls and distant talking voices that had been perceptible all day, seemed, no doubt because of their fading light and a consequently quickened sense of hearing, to become more frequent and insistent. The sacristan began for the first time to show signs of hurry and impatience. He heaved a sigh of relief when the camera and notebook were finally packed up and stowed away, and hurriedly back in Deniston, the western door of the church, under the tower. It was time to ring the Angelus. A few pulls at the reluctant ropes, and the great bell Bertrand, high up in the tower, began to speak, and swung her voice up among the pines and down the valley, loud with mountain streams, calling the dwellers on the lonely hills to remember and repeat the salutation of the angel, to whom he called blessed among women. With that a profound quiet seemed to fall for the first time that day upon the little town, and Deniston and the sacristan went out of the church. On the doorstep they fell into conversation. Monsieur seemed to interest himself in the old choir books in the sacristy? Undoubtedly. I was going to ask you if there were a library in the town. No, monsieur. Perhaps there used to be one belonging to the chapter, but it is now such a small place. Here come a strange pause of irresolution, as it seemed, and with a sort of plunge, he went on. But if monsieur is an amateur de les vieux livres, I have at home something that might interest him. It is not 100 yards. At once Deniston's cherished dreams of finding priceless manuscripts in untrodden corners of France flashed up, to die down again the next moment. It was probably a stupid missile of Plantin's printing about 1580, Where were the likelihood that a place so near Toulouse would not have been ransacked long ago by collectors? However, it would be foolish not to go. He would reproach himself forever after if he refused. So they set off. On the way, the curious irresolution and sudden determination of the sacristan returned to Denniston, and he wondered in a shamefaced way whether he would be decoyed into some prelude to be made away with as a supposed rich Englishman. He contrived, therefore, to begin talking with his guard, and to drag in a rather clumsy fashion, the fact that he expected two friends to join him early next morning. To his surprise, the announcement seemed to relieve the sacristan at once of some of the anxiety that oppressed him. "It is well," he said quite proudly. "It is very well, monsieur. Monsieur will travel in company with his friends. They will always be near him. It is a good thing to travel thus in company, sometimes." The last word appeared to be added as an afterthought, and to bring with it a relapse in the gloom for the poor little man. They were soon at the house, which were one rather larger than its neighbours, stone built, with a shield carved over the door, the shield of Alberic de Maudlin, a collateral descendant, Denniston tells me, of Bishop Jean de Maudlin. This Alberic were a canon of Comminges from 1680 to 1701. The upper windows of the mansion were boarded up, and the old place bore, as does the rest of Comminges, the aspect of decay and age. Arrived on his doorstep, the sacristan paused a moment. "Perhaps," he said, "perhaps after all, monsieur is not the time." "Not at all, lots of time. Nothing to do till tomorrow. Let us see what it is you have got." The door opened at this point, and a face looked out, a face far younger than the sacristan's, but bearing something of the same distress and look. On here it seemed to be the mark not so much of fear for personal safety, as acute anxiety on behalf of another. Plainly, the owner of the face was the sacristan's daughter, and but for the expression I had described, she was an handsome girl, enough girl. Ooh. "I curse you. I bring down malice upon your house and your family. May rotten misery be ever your lot in life. May the world turn itself against you. May all the spirits of the earth rise up in horror and bring damnation upon you. May never you find a quiet corner or peaceful spot. May your sheets rub against your skin as sandpaper. May you sleep not at all. I pray that you rack, writhe, and turn." Fucking bots. 8 bots. Right. Sorry about that. I really do hate those people showing up here. You want to invoke the spirits, you want to have people come up and talk to you. They come along trying to sell you things. It's written false people, fake spirits, wicked. Hate them. Wish them the worst. Still rude to be cursing on stream. I do apologise to everyone else. Assuming, of course, that anyone but Abe is still there. And if not, then I do apologise to Abe. Now, where was we? Ah, yes. Plainly, the owner of the face was the sacristan's daughter, and, but for the expression I've described, she was an handsome girl enough. She brightened up considerably on seeing her father accompanied by an able-bodied stranger. A few remarks passed between father and daughter, of which Denniston only caught these words said by the sacristan. He was laughing in the church, words which were answered only by a look of terror from the girl. In another minute they were in the sitting room of the house, a small large chamber, with a stone floor, full of moving shadow cast by a wood fire that flickered on great arms, on the great arms, I should say. Some of the character of an oratory were imparted by a tall crucifix, which reached almost to the ceiling on one side. The figure were painted on the natural colours. The cross were black. Under this stood a chest of some age and solidity, and when a lamp had been brought out and chairs set, the sacristan went to this chest and produced therefrom, with growing excitement and nervousness, as Denniston thought, a large book wrapped in a white cloth, on which cloth a cross were rudely embroidered in red thread. Even before the wrapping had been removed, Denniston began to be interested by the size and shape of the volume. Too large for a missal, he thought, but not the shape of an antiphona. Perhaps it may be something good after all. The next moment the book were open, and Denniston felt that he had at last lit upon something better than good. Before him lay a large folio, bound perhaps late in the 17th century, with the arms of Canon Alberic de Maudlin stamped in gold on the sides. There may have been 150 leaves of paper in the book, and on almost every one of them were fastened a leaf from an illuminated manuscript. Such a collection Denniston had hardly dreamed of in his wildest moments. Here were 10 leaves from a copy of Genesis, illustrated with pictures which could not be later than 700 AD. Further on were a full complete set of pictures from Assorted of English execution, of the very finest kind the 13th century could produce. And perhaps best of all, there were 20 leaves of unsealed writing in Latin, which a few words seen here and there told him at once must belong to some very early, unknown patristic treatise. Could it possibly be a fragment of the copy of Papias, on the word of our Lord, which were known to have existed as late as the 12th century at Nîmes? In any case, his mum made up. The book must return at Cambridge with him, even if he had to draw the whole of his balance from the bank and stay at St. Bertrand till the money come. He glanced up at the sacristan to see if his face yielded any hint that the book were for sale. The sacristan were fair, and his lips were working. If Monsieur would turn on to the inn, he said. So Monsieur turned on, thinking new treatise at every rise of leaf. And at the end of the book he came across 2 sheets of paper, a much more recent date than anything he had yet seen, which puzzled him considerably. It must be contemporary, he decided, with the unprincipled Canon Alberic, who had doubtless plundered the chapter library of St. Bertrand to form this priceless scrapbook. On the first of the paper sheets were a plan, carefully drawn, and instantly recognisable by a person who knew the ground, of the south aisle and cloisters of St. Bertrand's. There were curious signs looking like... Hang on, I've missed something here. There's a little note on the a footnote that I missed, which is referring to a fragment of the copy of Papias is on the word of our Lord, known to have existed as late in the 12th century as Nance, or Nims, I should say. No, it is. We now know that these leaves did contain a considerable fragment of that work, if not the actual copy of it. There were curious signs looking like planetary symbols, and a few Hebrew words in the corners. And at a northwest angle of the cloister were a cross drawn in gold paint. Below the plan were some lines of writing in Latin, which ran thus. Responsa 12.000 Responsa 12.000 dece 1694. Interrogatum est. Inviane. Responses invienes. Viame dives. Vies. Viame individuales. Vives. Moriene in lecto meo. Ita. Answered the 12th December 1694. They were asked, shall I find it? Answer, thou shalt. Shall I become rich? Thou wilt. Shall I live an object of envy? Thou wilt. Shall I die on my bed? Thou wilt. A good specimen of the treasure hunter's records. Quite reminds one of Mr. Minocanon Quatermain and Old St. Paul's, was Denniston's comment, and he turned the leaf. What he then saw impressed him, as he has often told me, more than he could have conceived any drawing or picture capable of impressing him. And, though the drawing he saw is no longer in existence, there is a photograph of it, which I possess, which fully bears out that statement. The picture in question were a sepia drawing at the end of the 17th century, representing, one would say at first sight, a biblical scene. For the architecture, the picture represented an interior, and the figures had the semi-classical flavour about them which the artists 200 years ago thought appropriate to illustrations of the Bible. On the right were a king on his throne, the throne elevated on 12 steps, a canopy overhead, lions on either side, evidently King Solomon. He was bending forward with outstretched sceptre in attitude of command. His face expressed horror and disgust, yet there were in it also the mark of imperious will and confident power. The left half of the picture were the strangest, however. The interest plainly centred there. On the pavement before the throne were grouped 4 soldiers, surrounding a crouching figure which must be described in a moment. A 5th soldier lay dead on the pavement, his neck distorted and his eyeballs starting from his head. The 4 surrounding guards were looking at the king. In their faces the sentiment of horror was intensified. They seemed in fact only restrained from flight by the implicit trust in their master. All this terror were plainly excited by the being that crouched in their midst. I entirely despair of conveying by any words the impression which this figure makes upon anyone who looks at him. I recollect once showing the photograph of the drawing to a lecturer on morphology, a person of, I was going to say, abnormally sane and unimaginative habits of mind. He absolutely refused to be alone for the rest of that evening, and he told me afterward that for many nights he had not dared to put out his light before going to sleep. Over the main traits of this figure I can at least indicate. At first you saw only a mass of coarse, matted black hair. Presently it was seen that this covered a body of fearful thinness, almost a skeleton, with the muscles standing out like wires. The hands were a dusky pallor, covered like the body with long coarse hairs, and hideously taloned. The eyes touched him with a burning yellow, had intensely black pupils, and were fixed upon the throned king with a look of beast-like hate. Imagine one of the awful bird-catching spiders of South America, translated in a human form, and endowed with intelligence, just less than human, and you will have some faint conception of the terror inspired by this appalling effigy. One remark is universally made by those to whom I have shown the picture. It was drawn from the life. As soon as the first shock of his irresistible fright had subsided, Denniston stole a look at his host. The sacristan's hands were pressed upon his eyes. His daughter, looking up at the cross on the wall, were telling her beads feverishly. At last the question were asked, "Is this book for sale?" There was the same hesitation, the same plunge of determination that he had noticed before, and then came a welcome answer. "If monsieur pleases." "How much do you ask for it?" "I will take 250 francs. This were confounding. Even a collector's conscience is sometimes stirred, and Denniston's conscience were tender rather than a collector's. "My good man," he said again, "the book is worth far more than 250 francs, I assure you, far more." The answer did not vary. "I will take 250 francs, not more." There were really no possibility of refusing such a chance. The money were paid, the receipt signed, a glass of wine drunk over the transaction, and then the sacristan seemed to become a new man. He stood upright. He ceased to throw these suspicious glances behind him. He actually laughed, or tried to laugh. Denniston rose to go. "I shall have the honour of accompanying Monsieur to his hotel," said the sacristan. "Oh, no thanks, it isn't 100 yards. I know the way perfectly, and there is a moon." The offer was pressed 3 or 4 times and refused as often. "Then Monsieur would summon me if he finds occasion. You will keep the middle of the road, and the sides are sewed up." Certainly," said Denniston, who were impatient to examine his prize by himself. He stepped out into the passage with his book under his arm. Here he were met by the daughter. She, it appeared, were anxious to do a little business of her own account, perhaps like Gazi, to take somewhat from the foreigner who her father had spared. "A silver crucifix and chain for the neck, monsieur. Monsieur would perhaps be good enough to accept it?" "Oh, really, Denniston hadn't much use for these things. What did mademoiselle want for it?" Nothing in the world, monsieur. Monsieur is more than welcome to it." The tone in which this and much more was said were unmistakably genuine, so that Denniston were reduced to profuse thanks and submitted to have the chain put around his neck. It really seemed as if he had rendered the father and daughter some service which they hardly knew how to repay. After he set off with his book, they stood at the door looking after him, and they were still looking when he waved them a last good night from the steps of the Chapeau Rouge. Dinner were over, and Denniston were in his bedroom, shut up alone with his acquisition. The landlady had manifested a particular interest in him since he had told her that he had paid a visit to the sacristan and bought an old book from him. He thought too that he had heard an hurried dialogue between her and the sacristan in the passage outside the salle à manger. Some word to the effect that Pierre and Bertrand would be sleeping in the house, and had closed the conversation. All this time a growing feeling of discomfort had been creeping over him, a nervous reaction perhaps after the delights of his discovery. Whatever it was, it resulted in a conviction that there was someone behind him, and he was far more comfortable with his back to the wall. All this, of course, weighed light in the balance as against the obvious value of the collection he had acquired. And now, as I said, he were alone in his bedroom, taking stock of Canon Alberic's treasure, which every moment revealed something more charming. "Bless Canon Alberic," said Denniston, in an inveterate habit of talking to himself. "I wonder where he is now. Dear me, I wish the landlady would learn to laugh in a more cheering manner. It makes one feel as if there was someone dead in the house. Half a pipe more, did you say? I think perhaps you were right. I wonder what that crucifix is the young woman insisted on giving me. Last century, I suppose. Yes, probably. It is rather a nuisance of a thing to have around one's neck, just too heavy. Most likely her father has been wearing it for years. I think I might give it a clean up before I put it away." He had taken the crucifix off and laid it on the table, and her attention was caught by an object lying on the red cloth just by his left elbow. 2 or 3 ideas of what it might be flitted through his brain, with their own incalculable quickness. A pen wiper? No, no such thing in the house. A rat? No, too black. A large spider? I trust a good does not. No. Good God. A hand, like a hand in the picture. In another infinitesimal flash, he had taken it in. pale, dusky skin covering nothing but bones and tendons of appalling strength. Coarse black hairs longer than ever grew on a human hand. Nails rising from the ends of the fingers and curving sharply downward and forward, grey, horny and wrinkled. He flew out of his chair, with deadly inconceivable terror clutching his arm. The shape whose left hand rested on the table were rising to a standing posture behind the seat, his right hand crooked above his scalp. There were black and tattered drapery about it. The coarse hair covered it, as in all was in the drawing. The lower jaw was thin, what can I call it, shallow, like a beast's. The teeth showed behind the black lips. There were no nose. The eyes were fiery yellow, against which the pupils showed black and intense. And the exulting hate and thirst to destroy life which shone there were the most horrifying feature in the old vision. There was intelligence of a kind in them, intelligence beyond that of a beast, below that of a man. The feelings which this horror stirred in Denniston were the intense physical fear and most profound mental loathing. What did he do? What could he do? He has never been quite certain what words he said, but he knows he spoke. He grasped blindly at the silver crucifix, that he was conscious of a movement towards him on the part of the demon, and he screamed with the voice of an animal in hideous pain. Pierre and Bertrand, as two sturdy little servant men who rushed in, saw nothing. They felt themselves thrust aside by something that passed out between them, and found Denniston in a swoon. They sat up with him that night, and his two friends were at St. Bertrand's by 9 o'clock next morning. He himself, though still shaken and nervous, were almost himself by that time, and his story found credence with them, though not until they had seen the drawing and talked with the sacristan. Almost at dawn, the little man accompanied him on some pretence, and had listened with the deepest of interest to the story retold by the landlady. He showed no surprise. It is he, I have seen him myself, was his only comment, and all questionings but one replied with vouchsafed. 2 fois je l'ai vu, 1000 fois je l'ai senti. He would tell them nothing of the provenance of the book, nor any details of experience. I should soon sleep, and my rest will be sweet. What should you trouble me? He said. There's a little footnote attached to that. He died that summer. His daughter married and settled at St. Paul. She never understood the circumstances of her father's obsession. Back to the main text. We shall never know what he or Canon Alberic de Maudlin suffered. At the back of that fateful drawing were some lines of writing such which may be supposed to throw light on the situation. Contradicto Salomonis cum demonio nocturno albergus de molinas deveniat, videos in adultorum pies qui habitat sancte ventrene demonorium effugutara intercedes pro me misererimo. Primi udi note 12 million December 1694, udebo mox optimum peccae et passum sum plura ad hoc passuris, December 29, 1701. Footnote translation. The dispute of Solomon with the demon of the night, drawn by Alberic de Maudlin, Versil. O Lord, make haste to help me. Psalm, who dwelleth. 91. St. Bertrand, who put his devils into flight, pray for me. Most unhappy. I saw it first on the night of December 12th, 1694. Soon I shall see it for the last time. I have sinned and suffered, and have more to suffer yet. 20th December 1701. The Gala Christian gives the date of the canon's death as December 31st, 1701, in bed of a sudden seizure. Details of this kind are not common in the great work of Samathani. I've never quite understood what was Denniston's view of the events I've narrated. He quoted me once a text from Ecclesiasticus. Some spirits there be that are created for vengeance, and in their fury lay on sore strokes. On another occasion he said, Isaiah was a very sensible man. Doesn't he say something about night monsters living in the ruins of Babylon? These things are rather beyond at present. Another confidence of his impressed me rather. I sympathised with it. We had been last year at Comminges to see Canon Alberic's tomb. It is a great marble erection with an effigy of the canon in a large wig and soutane, an elaborate eulogy of his learning below. I saw Denniston talking for some time with the vicar of St. Bertrand's. As we drove away he said to me, I hope it isn't wrong. You know I am a Presbyterian, but I believe there will be saying of Mass and singing of dirges for Alberic de Maudlin's rest. Then he added with a touch of the northern British in his tone, I had no notion they came so dear. The book is in the Wentworth collection at Cambridge. The drawing was photographed and then burnt by Denniston on the day when he left Comminges on the occasion of his first visit. That's the end of the piece. Now, that is a pretty scary one. That will probably I'd say probably the scariest of the M.R. Jameses we read so far. And my throat's still feeling alright, but I can start to feel the wear, so I am going to call it after that one. But let's do our little bit of commentary, shall we? After I have a small drop of water to parch my throat. So, let's go through them. There's a few things that I think are worth clarifying in case people don't have the context for them. First is the record of Treasure Hunter, which seems fitting that it's come up, given that I was talking earlier about invoking the spirits. But that is a record of someone who is divining by way of the spirits. I spoke to him, or perhaps in this case a demon, as it might be. But generally what would happen is you'd call up the spirit in question and would ask it questions, the answers to which would generally lead you to fortune or fame or whatever. It's actually where the term necromancy comes from. The oldest use of the word necromancy referred to divination by the way of the dead, calling up spirits of dead people and then consulting them for information on where they have hidden treasure or other riches they knew of in life. As for the invocation specifically of the demon, I don't exactly have a great grasp of demonology. He doesn't like me knowing anything about magic really, but you pick up a few things here and there. But the demonology stuff is generally restricted. There's a reason the labs were down in the deep parts of the library. And yeah, but I do know that Solomon was supposed to be a king who had power over demons in some way. He had a ring or something. I come across a copy of his key, which is a list of demons, and I suppose you can invoke names from that. And if you're in the intention of looking for treasure beyond perhaps what a spirit you could call up, no. Demons are supposed to be very good at giving people things in exchange for, I mean, they're immortal souls generally, but yeah. Perhaps if you're a clergyman and you think you're strong in the faith, and you have knowledge of some of the demons known to Solomon, you think you could overpower them, or control them or bind them, which is a very folly thing, I think, because that is practically the textbook definition of the sin of spiritual pride, which, will get you pretty quickly in God's bad books. But yeah. As for the demon itself, I mean, it's described in pretty horrifying terms, but, I wouldn't call it super accurate to what I know of demons. I mean, I guess I don't. The beasts down here aren't demons, I should clarify. Some of them is demonic, but they're all like amalgamations of different things. So, when the coarse black hair does sound familiar, that does sound like something that I have seen. So I can imagine this being a demon. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of signs that show to it. He doesn't see it until he takes off the silver cross, and I think he's alone as well. So it shows up only the ones who aren't protected by, I presume, blessed silver, and whom are alone to bear witness to it. Which, would also imply some degree of delusion or whatever, but obviously he didn't know this. As to the cause of it, I'd say the book itself, I mean, most of it's probably fine, like valuable collections, and it's in the Cambridge Library now, but probably if there's anything that was going to be responsible for it, it would be the record, the Treasure Hunter record. The image itself is probably also not an ideal thing to have. But the treasure hunting record would assume that it was a demon that Alberic himself called up, would be a physical manifestation of that, or a record of that summoning. Which might, from what I understand of magical practice, mean that it would be a lingering, or could contain a lingering trace of the spell, allowing the demon to manifest itself into reality. Functionally a cursed object. And of course the possessor would be the one haunted by this cursed object. And of course it would be more limited than the actual summoning, because it would be a trace rather than the original, so hence why it can only appear under certain conditions, and I don't know if it could do physical harm to someone or if it's just scaring them. I mean, it doesn't do, well, no, that's not true, it pushes aside the two serving fellas who come to see it, although they don't see it. So I guess it manifests somewhere physically. But yeah. It's probably something to do with consensus. Lamp is very big on talking about consensus when it comes to magic, but I'm not, like I say, I'm not super versed in it. He doesn't teach me stuff, so yeah. But from what I'm told, it is easier to affect one person with a magic effect when they're the only one aware of it. So maybe that's what's happened. Couldn't say. Again, I'm not sure if these are fiction or if they're accounts that have been collected. I don't know. Wish I had someone to research that stuff, but yeah. Still, maybe it will become clear as we go through them. Yeah, that's about it for tonight. Obviously, we've got lots more to be reading. Coming days, all those Kafkas, some more James, some more Wilde, more Melville, all sorts of little novels, and yeah, plenty to be getting on with. So, if there's anything that I have mentioned in my connection that sounds interesting to you, let me know. I'm trying to think if I've got anything else that I can. What else have I got that stands out? I've got The Outsider by a man called Albert Camus as well. Sherry by Colette. Sign of the Fort by Arthur Conan Doyle. Yeah, a few others as well. I'll go through them more in detail, but yeah. Obviously, if there's anything that I've mentioned that stands out to you, feel free to let me know, either now in chat or on the Bird website or just somewhere else. There are ways to reach me, and I'll be happy to do them. No one really seems to have any particular preference otherwise, so if even one person wants something to specifically read, I'm happy to do it. But yeah, oh, sounds like the wards is failing. So yeah, with that, I guess I'll call it here. Thank you as always to anyone who has been here, especially to Abbe, who I know has been here. And ta-ra.